right. So now at least if we understand quality, quantity, and distribution, and you understand at least what a categorical proposition is, we could get into the square of oppositions and Venn diagrams a little. And so before we get into these, there's actually one major principle, and this is a philosophical principle that we kind of have to parcel out for the students, because it's just very important, because the book is going to go through two forms of these logical principles. Mm-hmm. Now, but to get existential import, you kind of have to understand a little bit of the conundrum that was posed in modern philosophy, in early modern philosophy, that kind of spawned Boolean logic to come into existence. All right, so within modern philosophy, there came about a notion of complete doubt, and so it was a rejection of Aristotelian metaphysics. And with rejecting Aristotelian metaphysics, nothing was ever grounded on anything anymore.
What do you mean by complete doubt?
So for like Descartes wants to...
Like you cannot actually know anything kind
yes,
of thing?
Yeah. It begins with complete doubt, right? So Descartes then begins to conclude what is not doubtful, which he begins like with himself and everything. But this is the era of skepticism, basically, that virtually nothing can be a given quantity of knowledge as an axiom. Okay. Like you even need to parcel out your axioms. Like there's nothing that is known as a base. Mm-hmm. And so given that, the issue that this gave to logic was that logic, since it uses language, has at least a basis that the external world exists, mm-hmm. right? It requires this assumption. It's kind of like if you do in mathematics, it requires that numbers are real, like there's something true about numbers. And if you don't believe in numbers, and then there's no real way that you can do mathematics, like it's literally impossible. And so with logic, the existence of something, it was important in order for me to speak of anything at all. Because to speak of something true, it needs its reference. So if we go back to our conversation with language, without a reference to a term, then the term is meaningless.
Yeah.
But once it has a reference, then it's meaningful. And so what happens when you deny the reference's existence? Then virtually all terms are meaningless.
Or you deny that things can refer to other things, or words can refer to other things.
Right, because you're questioning the existence of the thing.
Yes.
Right? And so if there is no more assumption that the external world exists, that maybe we're living in a matrix or being deceived by an evil demon.
Simulation theory.
Yes. And then you deny the existence of reality. If you deny the existence of reality,
you're insane.
and then everything that we speak of essentially has no meaning. There's no more semantics then. And so if there is no more meaning in things, where does logic exist? And so you could go with a route like Nietzsche, and Nietzsche says that the logic was simply the construction of the Jews and the Greeks in order to manipulate the masters and to subjugate them towards their will. Yeah. And that's essentially what he said in the end, that he didn't believe in logic. And so you can be irrational, but if you do think that the world exists, or if you do at least want to hold on to logic, the only way that they were able to hold on to it was by what now is known as Boolean logic, because it was discovered by George Boole, that most things will be logically undetermined mm-hmm. In terms of its I guess immediate inferences, except for contradiction. Yeah. The contradiction was the only thing that does not require semantics to be at play. Like a contradiction exists only syntactically. It doesn't have to exist semantically.
Yeah.
And so because of the book is going to propose two forms of logic. It says Aristotelian logic and Boolean logic, and that's the way that it parcels this out. So Boolean logic, let's cover that one first, because it's quick to cover, because basically everything is logically undetermined except for contradiction. And so when you given these four types of categorical propositions, you then have immediate inferences that one can make given the proposition alone. That doesn't require an argument altogether. And so what he has noticed was that if you claim that, for example, the A proposition is true. So let's say you say it is true that all dogs are mammals. And then its contradiction must be false. And so if A is true, its contradiction will be an O proposition, which is some dogs are not mammals. And so if some dogs are mammals is true, if all dogs are mammals is true, then some dogs are mammal or not mammals is false. And the same thing is with an E proposition. So if you say no mammals, no dogs are cats, and then its contradiction, some dogs are cats, is false. Mm-hmm. And vice versa. If you claim that some dogs are cats is true, which is not, but let's just say you claim that is true, and then its contradiction, no cats are dogs, must be false.
Yeah.
And so that in Boolean logic, that's the only thing that can be known. And so this is why if you ever learn like computer science,
so this is like that negative knowledge of negative.
It's just knowledge of syntax. That's all it is. Mm-hmm. Like there's no meaning behind it. You just know that.
Is that where true. Like the idea that all existence is language? Kind of come from that?
Yeah, that we kind of could construct reality through language, right?
Yeah. Okay.
Well, yeah.
Not to get into that, but
yeah, for the philosophy class we can.
Yeah.
And so, so contradiction is the only thing. So this was helpful for computer science. So this is why for computer science they use Boolean logic, because they don't have to determine any other possibility. It's simply you could construct an entire algorithms on contradictions. And so ones and zeros. You have one, which is the actualization of truth, and zero, which is a contradiction. And so everything is simply made out from in computer science from Boolean logic. All right. So, but obviously this is not fully helpful. I really don't think it's fully helpful, because if you, for example, want to be a biologist and you encounter a new creature, the first question of the biologist isn't, does it really exist? Right? I mean, it's like, no, you assume it exists.
Because it's there.
Because it's there, right? Yeah. And so now that it is there, what can I say about it? And so I find the classical or Aristotelian logic to be a little more useful for everyday life. And so there are more immediate inferences that one can make given a proposition in a classical sense. All right, so we know at least the contradiction. So the contradiction is going to be the same with Aristotelian logic, but now there's other ones. So there's also what is called contrary. So contrary only exists with an A and an E proposition. And so if you were to claim that an A proposition is true, so you say that all dogs are mammals is true, and then its contrary, which is an E proposition, no dogs are mammals, must be false. And so you can immediately infer that its contrary is false if given that one is true, and vice versa. So if you have its E proposition, no dogs are cats is true, and then its A proposition, all dogs are cats, must be false. But it could only move from truth to falsity. Whereas in contradiction, you could begin with a false claim and then the other one must be true.
Yeah.
But this is not true for contrary. And so if you begin with a false proposition and you say that it is false that all dogs are cats, it does not therefore make it true that no dogs are cats. You cannot immediately infer that given the falsity of the proposition. It could only move from truth to false. The other one is subcontrary. So subcontrary is only for an I and O proposition. And so given the I and O proposition, this only moves from falsity to truth. And so if you claim that it is false that it is false that some dogs are cats, therefore it is true that some dogs are not cats. And the same way the other way around. But you have to begin with a falsity. You cannot begin with the truth. And so if you begin with the truth, say it is true that some cats are hairy, it does not make it also true that some cats are not hairy. It could be the case that they're all hairy.
Yeah.
But just given the proposition that some cats are hairy doesn't make the other one true. And so it could only move from falsity to truth for subcontrary. And then the last one is subalternation. And so subalternation is only within, you separate the quality of the both. And so basically from an A to an I proposition and an E to an O proposition. And so if the A proposition is true, so if you say that all dogs are mammals is true, and then its I proposition must also be true. And so if all dogs are mammals true, then some dogs are mammals must also be true. And then the false value flows up. And so basically if If you say it is false that some cats are dogs, and then it is also false that all cats are dogs. And so that's the same thing on the other side. And so if you have an E proposition, and then you say that no cats are, you say it is true that no cats are dogs, and then it is also true that some cats are not dogs. And again, the falsity flows up, that if you say it is false that some cats are not dogs, then therefore it is false that no cats are dogs. And so those are the other immediate inferences that one can make given these propositions. And then you have some formal fallacies in there where you have illicit sub-contrary. That's like the example I gave you of, say, if one is true, therefore the other is true. It's a very common fallacy that people make. They think that if you make a sum proposition, so if you say the some S are P, whatever it may be, and then it's also true that some S are not P. It's like where that's...
It doesn't necessarily follow.
It doesn't necessarily follow from that. And then the other one is illicit contrary. And so illicit contrary is when you, where you begin with a false claim and then claim the other one is true. And then there's illicit subalternation, and that's basically when you flip it around. All right.
Ta-da.
So that is pretty much the end of understanding the basics of categorical propositions. The next thing we're going to look at is translating them from ordinary language, because once you have ordinary language, you kind of understand how to make it into proper categorical form. And then we're also going to look at a few other principles that each one of these can go by, but that'll be for the next class. And so, all right. So for the students, I want you to really look from chapters 4.1 to 4.5, and and then I'll put the exercises up online, and then you could begin to do them. If you have any questions, you could ask us. All right, sounds good. Okay, good. Do you mind shutting them off?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.